Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Business of Business podcast, Two Daughters and Their Dad. I'm your host, Staci J. Dempsey, and thankfully, like always, I have one of the other daughters and the one and only dad. So good morning and good afternoon to the both of you.
Good morning.
Good morning, good afternoon to everyone.
And good morning and good afternoon to all of our listeners and our viewers. We want to thank you all so very much for tuning in and joining us today. So today we'd like to talk a little bit about negotiating skills and also managing your business expenses. When do you take a look at those business expenses? And maybe when are there times that it is appropriate or even necessary to negotiate some of those line items? And thankfully, both Dad and Jennifer, and maybe myself just a little bit, have done some negotiating a few times in the history of ourselves and our businesses. So, Jennifer, why don't we start out with you, because you've shared many times on the podcast what we've maybe learned from Dad in negotiating in certain areas. So why don't you kind of talk a little bit about the evolution of where you are now? Before we hit record, you hit toe to toe. You shared toe to toe in email. So why don't you share with our viewers and our listeners a little bit about what that means and what that looks like now for negotiating some things in your business?
Oh man, yeah, guys, we're coming up on 9 years in business this month. And my very first lease, I had no idea what I was doing. And that's really where negotiation started for me. I've told you before, it didn't matter what the lease said or what the contract said. I was going to sign it regardless because I just wanted to open my own business. And because I had Dad who not only read the lease but was in the meetings with me and really went to bat for me, he's probably saved me at least $20,000 by just helping me negotiate a lease the first time around. And I remember thinking at the time, okay, who cares if I'm like need to take care of the air conditioning? And he's like, huh? What do you mean? And he, like, I don't know, saw into the future because the air conditioner did break and we needed a brand new one, and he saved me $20,000 by doing that for me. And so I learned from that experience that everything is negotiable in business. So now I'm getting ready to embark on my third lease renewal, and it's never just copy and paste and sign and move on, right? What's interesting to me is my first lease was 5 years. The second one I signed was 3 years, and I just signed one year ago. And so I wanted to do a 1 year lease because I decided to change everything about my business. And it was the biggest risk I've ever taken. And I wasn't sure if it was going to fail or not. So obviously I didn't want to be locked into another 5 year lease. And so we negotiated. And one big thing that I learned to negotiate is free rent. One of my favorite things. And landlords don't like to give that out very often, but that's one thing I really go to bat with here. So I think coming up on my third lease agreement, something new that I'm thinking about is an exit strategy. Now, I've been through COVID. I've been through, life changes. When I first opened my business, I was in my 20s. I was single, no kids. Has been lifing, guys. It's given it to me lately. And so sometimes I'm unsure if this space is going to be the space that I really see myself in the next 5 years. So I don't want to be locked into a really long agreement. And so that is something new that I'm adding into my lease of like, even if I'm going to sign a 3 year lease, what else can I ask for if something happens, right? If, something happens to me, if something, if this space, we outgrow it sooner than 3 years or whatever that looks like. So adding an exit strategy in there, like a clause, is something new that I'm playing around with my landlord now. So I'll have to let you guys know how that goes. Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing I've learned in agreements and just signing any kind of contract is just making sure that it works for you, and making it make sense for everyone involved. Obviously, we can't ask for like the moon and the stars. The landlords need to make money and it has to make sense for them too. And so I think because I had Dad from the beginning, negotiating, understanding contracts, understanding leases, like anything else in business, the more that you do it, the more practice you have, the more confident that you have. And so I was really proud to tell everyone on the podcast, like, even though I'm coming up on a new lease agreement. I haven't called dad once yet about it. So girl's getting good over here.
I
Yes,
mean,
you are.
and really what you're sharing, Jen, is just your number one, your negotiating skills obviously have gotten better, because this is not the only area of things that you've had to negotiate, but also just the confidence, like, hey, let's talk about this. Let's put this in writing. And I know that a lot of people struggle with like, oh, I just even the thought of not just agreeing right from the get-go, of whatever the line item is, whatever maybe the business expense is, that there's just no confidence. And I think that that's half the battle. So clearly, I think what all of our viewers and listeners can see and hear is that your confidence has increased dramatically. And also because not only because you can still call dad, even though dad's grinning, he's like, wait a minute. Wait a second. Okay. I'm going to call you after this podcast is done so I can get the scoop. You're not going to leave me out of the loop. But you've seen where negotiations have worked in your favor, that asking for certain things and, being creative and thinking outside of the box, has worked. And so it should boost your confidence. So that's great, Jen. So Dad, share a little bit about your thoughts on just negotiating skills and managing expenses and when to look at those types of things.
Well, it's an important topic for our listeners because just like in your personal life, there's when people talk about revenue, making money, income, it all is tied to expenses. You can have all types of revenue coming into your business, but if you're not managing your expenses, there ain't much hitting the bottom line, and we're not in business just to churn money. We're in business to make a profit. And so, the way you make profit is certainly, invest in ways to drive more revenue, but also effectively manage your expenses. So, and those things that need to be negotiated, you need to develop negotiated skills. So a lease is a primary example of that. One piece of advice I would give, especially those entrepreneurs that are just starting out and they need space, so they have to go out and get space, is to negotiate, maybe a little longer term lease with kind of a lower entry point, but taking maybe larger increases over the 5 years. So for example, the landlord makes, this is the offer. You see what the total amount is for 5 years, then go back to them and say, okay, I'd like to start year one here lower because I'm just getting my business off the ground, but I'm willing to take on larger increases in year 3, 4, and 5, something like that, to then at the end of the 5 years, the landlord's still collecting the revenue that would collected over 5 years. It's just skewed differently.
Yeah.
Rather than maybe something a little more even over that 5 years. So, that would be one thing that you would want to be negotiating. You want to make sure you're looking at the details, just like Jennifer said, the details of not just rent and, but also what's the cost of the common areas, the snow removal, because that's usually another charge on top of the rent. So get an understanding of that. Again, responsibilities for, any breakages, heating, air conditioning, any of those bigger expenses, how much of that would be your responsibility. So, those are the things you really want to pay attention to. So, negotiating your lease is a big deal. And I think we talked about some other areas that that are negotiable in many cases. Some of that could be, the cost of your technology, the cost of, internet, the cost of phone systems. There's a lot of other areas that, that are probably negotiable, with the vendor in terms of, either starting out or you've been in business a while. Sometimes, again, you get complacent, with those expenses. And next thing you know, you call Verizon up or Xfinity, or maybe they're one and the same. But the point being is, hey, this is what I have. I mean, in terms of phones and internet, security systems, I want to negotiate this. And many times they will. They will, to keep your business. So again, those are the things that you just don't want to get complacent with and you want to be paying attention to. The other, and I like what Jennifer, her thinking on, for example, with the lease, is also be thinking out into the future.
Yeah.
That 3-year, 5-year, do I want to enter into some longer term contracts, whatever they may be, if I'm looking to potentially expand or need to move because I'm going to need larger space, so those are the things that you want to be careful with. Now, I am a landlord. I have office space that I lease out. And so one of the things that I'm certainly looking at is, what does the area demand in terms of rent? What rent can I charge in the area and be not way over or way under? I want to always get an understanding of that, and then also understand how to handle any common expenses, make sure that's very clear, and then present it. You present it to, the person, the business, and, and then obviously understand there could be some back and forth. But, usually I've always, it's always worked out to where, everybody feels like they walk away winning. And that's the key too in negotiating, is not feel like there's a win-loss, but how can I get what I want, but still make it to where the other side feels like they've gotten what they wanted, or at least close to it. So those are some other ideas to be thinking about. But here's the most important one, is never negotiate against yourself. So, if somebody, if a landlord or whatever came and said, well, make me an offer on what you wanted to do, right? Don't bite on that, because you might be making a far bigger offer than what you can get. So you're right off the bat, you're negotiating against yourself. Always try to get the other party to make that initial offer, and then you counter with, something lower in most cases. But if you go first, you might have already, went higher than what you would have needed to had you allowed them to go and make that offer to you first. So never negotiate against yourself. Try and always get the other side to make that first offer. So, and then your other expenses would be just that, periodic review. I mean, we're in the insurance business, Staci, and I know we have clients that will shop us out periodically.
Sure.
Just to make sure our numbers are still in line. And so, and that's smart business to do that. So any vendors that there's a competition out there, there's other vendors doing that. Sometimes making it known that you're getting competitive prices on whatever those goods or services are, can also promote your current vendor to say, oh, you know what, I'm going to, we'll give you a little break here to stay with us, so that you don't go shopping. So, those are ways to also, maintain or, keep your expenses in check. So, especially if you're a good customer, paying on time and all those kind of things. So you have to always be looking at your expenses, always.
So let's say, for example, it's not necessarily like you have no control over how much your products cost. For example, in my business, I need products to be able to run my business, right? When I say products, I'm meaning hair color, lightener, developer. I need a bath bar. And so we don't have much control over how much those products cost. We can't really negotiate prices in that way. But what I realized is that here I am, I have 10 years of loyalty with a certain brand, right? And so my salon only carries a brand, this one brand. There's tons of brands that I could be carrying in the salon. So when it comes to negotiating, it's not necessarily about money, like the products cost what they cost, but it's how can the brand support the business after all this loyalty? So then I went to the brand and negotiated, listen, I want 4 free classes a year. I want you to send an educator into my business to teach 4 classes a year, and I want my back bar stocked, right? So it's not always about negotiating cents or
Yeah.
the necessarily money, but it's like, hey, I'm giving you loyalty, and if not, that's okay. But then I'm gonna open myself up to do business with other brands, because again, it's about working smart, right? And we know that it costs money to have shampoo and conditioner on our back bar to be able to wash people's hair. And so I think with if I'm spending tens of thousands of dollars with one brand every single year, then we should be getting something from that relationship, right? So it could be examples like that where, you know, you're not necessarily looking for a discount, but you're looking for support in some way. And so that can work well. It's funny, as I'm listening to Dad talk, I'm like, well, dang, Dad, you gave everybody all my best piece of advice that I've learned from you in like a few minutes that it took me 9 years to get out of you. What's going on here? But those were some really great points.
Yeah.
You know, when it comes to leases, the one thing that surprised me is that you focus so much on rent that really what you should be paying attention to is CAM charges too, because you could be set on your rent and then that CAM charge fluctuates, right? So typically, in my experience, by the end of the year, we've gone over budget and what the CAM charges are, and then I get another bill, right? So for me, because I understand what I'm paying for with the CAM charges, I'm real quick to call my landlord, like, these dumpsters are a mess, right? My clients are pulling into the parking lot. The dumpsters are overflowing. There's vultures eating stuff out of them. We get this cleaned up. This is not a good look, right? Or, there's a big snowstorm coming. I already know I'm going to get billed for it, right? So listen, I want some salt laid down. My clients need to be able to get into the building safely, X, Y, and Z. So understanding that and then being able to advocate for yourself, like, listen, if this is what you're charging me for, then this is my expectation, and making sure that that's clear to your landlord. Like, I want it to look nice, right? If I'm paying this bill, I want my clients to be able to pull up to the salon and it looks really nice in those ways. And you just have to keep doing that and keep advocating in that way for your business as well. So all fun
Well,
stuff.
and just so everybody is clear on what CAM charges are, if you're not in a lease, that is that charge over and above, the rent for the common areas of the whatever area, if you're renting in like a plaza or strip center, there's common areas, there's the snow, sidewalks, trash. Those are all things that aren't built into the lease. You pay on top of that. And then, as you were saying, Jen, you pay, but if the amount goes over, then you got to pay more, so, and that's a very important number to look at, right? Because, that can be a bit expensive for sure.
That's why I'm always hoping it doesn't snow. Please
Well,
don't
me
snow.
too.
Oh, that's cost me money.
Yeah. Well, me too.
Right?
Yeah. I don't like the snowplow bills.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another point that I was thinking when you were talking, Dad, is, every so often, I want to say 80% of my business is ran through credit cards. And everybody has a different opinion on this topic, but I'm going to share my opinion, is that I have never transferred credit card fees onto my clients. I think credit card fees is a part of doing business. And so that's just how I choose to operate. And so I think, when we're talking about credit card processing fees, when we're talking about, Comcast or internet, if you have to make a change, it disrupts the business, right? It has to be very calculated on when we're going to do that. Or maybe you're changing software systems or something like that. But it is good from time to time to look at, what are the fees that you're paying? How much are you paying to be able to accept credit cards with Comcast, and just those things that you don't think about day to day. It's kind of like you pay the bill, it runs, and that's it. But it's good to do a check-in and then be able to negotiate. I know in 9 years of business, I think I've changed my credit card processing 3 times. And, obviously I want it to work with the softwares that I'm working. It's not all about money all of the time. Like something's cheaper, so I'm going to go with the cheaper option. I want it to make sense. And so, I want clients to be able to go to my website and buy a gift certificate. So I'm willing to pay more for a certain credit card processing to be able to have that on my website and things like that. But it is good to tap into that and then plan ahead for those things because, changing major things inside of your business can disrupt business. So when's the best time to do those things or make a move or change your software? Because it can be stressful, time consuming, even if it is on the other side, you're going to be saving some money. It should be really well planned out because it can be hard to change those things. I know even for me, for a long time, I had a hardwired camera inside of my business. And when I went to look at kind of like what we were paying for the whole package, it just, when you think of like Blink cameras and what are those doorbell cameras people have now?
Doorbells.
Ring doorbells, right? My point is there's other options. So we could have this hardwired, depending on your needs, of course, inside of your business. You can make changes like that. Like here I am paying $150 a month for a hardwired security system. Maybe we can change it. Maybe there's a better option out there to save some money. So again, in my opinion, it's all hard. It all gives you a headache. But in the long run, it's kind of just things that you do those checkups on your business to say, wait a minute, how much money are we spending on this again? And why? And then make some changes.
But real quick, Jen, I mean, you make a great point too, and that's, you want to be looking at things, but you also need to measure, if you change, what level of disruption it could be for, your clients or for yourself, and just make sure it's worth it. But conversely, don't let the fact that it might be a little disruptive keep you from making changes. If the benefit cost analysis makes sense over some, reasonable amount of time. But I've just seen and have been guilty of just allowing, looking at things and not really keeping track of, is this something we should be looking at, should be reevaluating, should be pricing out, should be getting competitive bids, should be negotiating. And so, I mean, we're fortunate here. I mean, we have, pretty much an operations manager who, we can look at things and then delegate that over, for him to, to do. And he's very good at even keeping an eye on it, all the time to make sure we're not overpaying. But, certainly not every business like that's you, Jen.
Right.
You're that person, right? So for most small businesses, that's where it gets, you're busy, running your business, you're busy working in your business, and now the thought of, trying to make some changes can be very daunting, because it's going to be more time. I'll tell you another area that businesses should be taking a look at too periodically, is like their payroll service. If they're using a payroll service or if they're not using a payroll service and doing it themselves, look at using a payroll service to take that, off their plate. But if you're using one, don't be afraid to also, check prices on that with other vendors, that do the same type of work. So that's another area that, and a big one, if you offer any type of employee benefits, health insurance, that's a huge one because again, that's getting harder and harder to manage. Health insurance has really gotten a group of that benefits and it's just a very difficult expense to manage these days. But, working with, a broker like us or working with, your employees, on negotiating, some of those things, can help manage those costs. But that's probably when I'm out and about talking with my clients over doing reviews and that type of thing. That's probably the most common challenges business is facing now, is how to manage, the healthcare costs, and that employee benefit, because it's just gotten super expensive. So being creative, working with good people is the key to that. So,
Yeah.
but it's all about expenses, It's not about the top line. It's about managing what comes out, big time, if you want to really build a profitable business.
For any
And
of
for
our listeners that have kids, I think they're probably the number one way you can get better at negotiating. I know I'm laughing while we're talking because my daughter's like, Mom, if I score a goal, will you take me to get ice cream? And I'm like, of course I will. So
I was just going to
pointers from our kids too. I'm always negotiating with them.
listen, small children, they don't care.
No.
They will say anything. They will do anything. They can make the most outrageous, landish request. Poker face. Yes. Mom, you're going to buy me a horse on a farm. You're going to take it to me every day if I score this goal. So take it from, I'm sure it's probably all small children, but take it from our children. If you are scared at negotiating, just make the most outlandish request. Poker face. The worst they can say is no. Small children make the best negotiators and probably build the best negotiators too. Hence, Dad is a master negotiator and he has negotiated lots of children over the years. So
Still am.
exactly. So, well, to all of our viewers and our listeners,
Before we end, I want to tell you two, this coming weekend is, I know this will drop after Mother's Day, but this Sunday is Mother's Day. And I know, again, you two are two of the best moms that I know. And so I just want to say happy Mother's Day. And I am just extremely proud of the both of you and just how you pour into your children in such a loving and effective way. I'm a blessed pop to see my children really caring for my grandchildren. So thank you. Happy Mother's Day.
thanks, Dad. And thank you to all of our viewers and our listeners for tuning in. We hope that today has been helpful, and we want to wish you all a very happy Mother's Day. And we will see you guys in our next episode. Bye-bye.